blacks in technology.
Blacks in technology. Blacks in technology. Blacks in technology. Blacks in technology. Blacks in technology.
On this episode of the Bit Tech Talk podcast, Greg sits down with Lexi B, Alexandria Noel Butler, affectionately known as Lexi B, who's considered one of Silicon Valley's most candid and prominent voices. Her thought-provoking advice and opinions on how to create a more equitable work environment stem from her own experiences working in some of the most popular tech companies today. Greg will discuss Lexi's journey in the tech industry, as well as her venture, Sista Circle, Black Women in Tech. And now our host of the Bit Tech Talk podcast, Greg Greenlee.
Hey, Lexi, welcome to the show.
Thank you. I'm so excited to be here.
Thank you. I appreciate you coming on. The pleasure is all of ours, I must tell you. So I really want to jump right into to Q&A and get into, talking about your background. So tell us a little bit about yourself, where you're from, your education, all that jazz.
Yeah. So I was born and raised in St. Louis, Missouri. So I'm a Midwesterner at heart.
Okay. Midwest here too.
Yes, Midwest.
Yeah.
But like I always tell people, most people from the Midwest are actually Southern. So we really just Southern people. Little bit up the river.
Let New York tell it.
Right. Let New York tell it. But really Southern. If you ever visit St. Louis and you meet, St. Louisans, every time people are always like, I feel like I'm in the South. I'm like, basically, with better pizza. That's where I'm from. And I'm very proud to be from there. And then I moved out to California when I was 18 years old to go to Stanford University in the Bay Area in the Silicon Valley. And that really was the start to my career in tech. And I've been in tech ever since. I was definitely the Stanford undergrad who did not want to go into tech. Everybody that I went to school with was going into tech. It's a very weird place to be in when you're walking around campus and everyone's like, oh, I'm working at a startup. Like that was my college experience. Everyone working at a startup. And I was the person who wanted to move to New York and have the living single life and work in fashion PR. So if you want to tell the ancestors to your plans, you can make them laugh. And that didn't happen. And I started working in the tech industry at 22. So yeah.
Funny. So I guess what turned you off about, I shouldn't say turned off. I'm not sure if you were turned off, but what kind of, what was, all the people walking around, they are in tech. So what was it about tech that made you, I guess, kind of not look at it at first?
I think it's a mix of a lot of things. And it wasn't necessarily, maybe it was a little bit of fear of the unknown. Again, coming from St. Louis, Missouri, I come from a place where beer and baseball is what we do, right?
Yep, same here.
Everyone that I went to school with, that I interacted with, literally it was their parents worked for the Cardinals, the St. Louis Cardinals baseball, worked for Budweiser beer, worked for Boeing, so kind of an engineering-esque thing.
Right.
And then of course worked for what I like to call support industries of any community, teaching, doctoring, lawyering, preaching, the foundations of a community. And my parents, one is a doctor and one is a teacher. So I was immersed in this life of beer and baseball and just the jobs that support existence. So going to Stanford was a phenomenal experience, but I really walked in with this idea of, I don't want to be a doctor. I don't want to be a teacher. I do not want to lawyer. I do not want to preach. And I don't want to build planes. So what do I want to do? And I was definitely always the kid who was very creative. I wanted to just do something bigger. I loved color and I loved fashion and I loved consumer products. So I came to college with this idea of I want to do fashion and I want to do PR. I want to tell stories with really cool things. And at 18 years old, it was I know what a Vogue magazine is. I want to do that. What happened was that I get to school and everyone that I went to school with either wanted to be a doctor. And remember, I was like, absolutely not. or wanted to work in tech. And so me going to Stanford was the first time that I actually was introduced to the idea of tech. I literally remember taking my bike off of Stanford University and biking past the original Facebook headquarters and calling my mom and saying, wow, like Facebook is a building. And of course she was like, well, duh, it's a building. But when you're that young and you use these products, but you've never, you don't drive across the street and you just see the building that this technology that you use or that you've heard of come to life. That's a really big deal. I think there is a little bit of a rebel in me. So everybody was like, I'm working for a startup. I'm going to med school. And I was very much like, I'm not doing that. I'm not going to be ordinary. I'm going into fashion. And then of course at graduation, those same people were laughing in my face saying, oh yeah, so you're still going into fashion? Because I heard that you actually working at that tech company down the street. So that's what happened. Yeah.
Funny. So how did that come about? Like, how did you get introduced? I shouldn't say introduced, but how did you come to work in tech? Yeah.
The true story, behind the music story, I really wanted to work in fashion, or I'll put, a consumer-based company. I'm doing interviews and internships for all of these companies. At one point, I was thinking about working for Gap Corporate, because Gap Corporate is in San Francisco, or Sephora, because that's in the Bay Area. And what happened was I did an internship for Ralph Lauren PR the summer before my senior year. It was a transformative internship. What I remember from that internship is I remember always being the only Black person in the room. Mm. And Lexi, I was 21 at the time. I just remember having this fear that I would grow up, I would work in fashion, and I would have a daughter, and she would look at me and say, Mommy, why does no one else look like you? Mm. And it's interesting because I've always been in situations where I was the only one. Right. I think for me, in fashion, it was the first time that I was terrified, because in my head I was like, how am I going to explain to my little brown girl that despite the fact that I go to work every day and create campaigns or have discussions about colors and clothes and fabulousness that's on the bodies of white models at every magazine, that she still is beautiful? How am I telling my daughter that she's beautiful on one side of my mouth, but going to work and not finding ways to promote that beautiful melanin skin? And it was weird because I was working in fashion at a pivotal time. It was that time where there were not a lot of Black faces. If I could see the future, I probably would still be in fashion, because about 3 to 5 years later, really started to see that. When I was working in it, I didn't see it, and I didn't know how to see it. And I was terrified. So I came back to Stanford, and I was like, okay, so what am I going to do when I grow up? And again, check your privilege. I went to a school that had a lot of connections to, of course, the tech industry. Right. And so I somehow weaseled myself into a conference room, into an interview with a company called NetApp, not knowing what the company did, not really knowing what a program manager does. And I walked into the interview and I was like, look, I can learn, I can professionally yell at people, and I can take notes. That has to be a job. We have to make that something. Because I can't go to graduation and not have a job. Like, I come from the Midwest. I come from that Black family where my dad is like, don't have me come out here for graduation and you tell me that you don't know what you're right. So that's not going to work for me. So what do we have to do in this interview room to write this check? We just need something. And I was very blessed because the director of the team, my boss's boss, was a Black man. And he was kinfolk, to this day, kinfolk. And I think he pushed it through because he saw the potential in me. It wasn't necessarily like, oh, she's a Black girl. It was, I see the potential in you. I see my daughter in you. I see myself in you. And to be very frank, in many industries, a lot of kids get their first job because someone sees the potential in them. Right. When you have industries that are not diverse, the issue is that people don't see the potential in kids that don't look like them. And I was blessed because I had a man who saw me as a human in my interview loop and said, okay, I'm going to give you this shot, but you're going to have to work hard. And I was like, handled. I will be there on July 5th. Let's do this. And that's what happened.
That story is so profound. It's because, I mean, essentially that's what we're fighting for. Right. That opportunity, and not only just the opportunity, but because the opportunity is there for a lot of people, it's that whether or not that door is going to be open for us to allow us to take advantage of that opportunity. But the fact that he looked at you and said, I see potential, that's amazing. That's what we want. That's what we need. It's not, we need a handout. That's none of that stuff is true. It's a narrative that gets pushed, and that is so far from the truth. We want the same type of opportunity or chance or whatever fair shake that our white counterparts want. And that's to be able to walk into a room, not know jack crap about the job,
nothing,
and say, this is what I can bring to the table, this enthusiasm, my passion for learning. And they say, look, I see potential here. Let's hire them.
And that's right. That's what, and I'm so forever grateful, because it's funny, right? Is that him seeing that potential got me my start in this industry that I still work in after, a decade into it. And at the same time, him seeing that potential did not necessarily protect me from a lot of crazy things that happened in my career that gave me the start. And I think representation matters, because I remember I joined the company, and I think within like a year he had left the company and gone to do something else, something greater and more fabulous. But he was always that star, right? It was like, look, this man saw the potential in me. And so there were many moments where in my career, especially in that first 18 months, where it was really, really hard. And he was one of those people that I may not have talked to every day, but I would like remind myself in the bathroom. Like I would come to work and go to the bathroom and cry in the bathroom and yell in the bathroom and scream in the bathroom. And I look in the mirror and be like, yo, Kirk sees something that I don't see. So I don't know what he sees. These people are crazy, but I'm just going to pretend that I see what this man sees. And it really got me through. It really did. Yeah.
So is that when you became passionate about diversity, equity, and inclusion, or did that come later?
I think I've always been passionate about diversity, equity, inclusion. And I think it's a very interesting topic, because I think that many times people say things like, oh, you're passionate about that. And I'm like, oh, you mean my humanity? I'm really passionate about it. My existence, really passionate about that. My equity, really passionate about that. And so I've always been that kid who's been very passionate about, and I don't like to use this term necessarily like DE&I, because I've actually never officially worked in a DE&I capacity at a company at my 9-to-5 job. But I'm just like having a conversation about equity and how, because of what I look like and how I identify, I don't have any. I would love to have that conversation. They called me Minnie Malcolm when I was in kindergarten. So I've been having these conversations for a while. And I think that people want to call it a passion. I just like to call it the truth. Right. Yeah. So I learned very quickly in adulting, because regardless of what, industry you work in, there's this concept of adulting 101. And I really started noticing that there were kids who were my age in this company that I worked at, because I think we had about 300 new college grads. Right. And there was one person specifically that I'm still very close to today. My friend Dave, who happens to be white. And whenever we would sit down and talk to each other about what's going on at work, it just seemed like Dave had more information that was actually valid and important, right? And it wasn't because Dave and I were different. It wasn't because Dave and I, we came to work differently, right? It was these small things, these death by 1,000 paper cuts. I'll never forget. No one told me on my team about a performance review. Now you would think that if you're hiring a new college grad, there should be some kind of packet of like, welcome to Adulting 101.
Right.
Right. And I always tell people, when you hire new college grads, that's that extra work. Congratulations. You now have an employee, a labor force that is underpaid compared to the rest of the team. And with that cheap labor force comes this idea that you kind of have to be a parent. And Dave and I would have lunch, or we would talk in the micro kitchen, and he would say things to me like, yeah, so this performance review, what are you going to write on it? And I'd be like, what are you talking about, Willis? A what? A who? And he'd be like, I don't know. My boss just brought it up last week. Wait, so you didn't know either? Just someone just told you? Because nobody's telling me anything, right? And I realized very quickly that there's differences in my experience as a 22-year-old than that of this person that I'm talking to while drinking coffee. And that's where the equity piece came on. So my first introduction into it was that I actually went to the head of engineering for the company. And I was like, you know what? You're never going to get the shots you don't get. And I just walked into his office one day and I was like, I want $10,000 to start a new college grad program so I can learn all the things that I'm not being taught.
Wow.
And he was like, I need you to explain that. And I just sat in his office for 15 minutes and I said, look, there's like 300 new college grads here, supposedly. We don't know who each other are. We kind of look at each other weirdly in the elevator like, oh, you don't have wrinkles yet. Maybe we're the same age, right? And I said, but the few that I know that exist, we sit at lunch and we talk about stuff. And that stuff's important because no one's teaching me that stuff, right? And he was like, well, why don't you ask for that, Lexi? And I'm like, I don't know what I don't know. I'm 22. Like, what's going on? Yeah. I just started paying rent. I don't know, right? And so he gave it to me. He was like, okay, cool. Go play with this money. And if you do something good with it, I'll give you more. And that's really was my start to kind of community building or solidarity building. Was I was really trying to find answers to my questions. And so I contacted all the new college grads in my department and I said, how about we just sit together sometimes and like talk about life? Because clearly each of us have answers to questions that a lot of us don't even know the question exists, right? And better yet, I got company money so we can use the company's money to order food and have these conversations, right?
Wow.
And that's really how it started. And then I think that same mentality has really driven me to create other communities and other solidarity groups as I've gotten older, because I think that the shared information, bringing people to a table with some food and saying like, so tell me what you didn't know 2 weeks ago. Let's fill in the gaps is very profound.
That sounds a lot like Juntos. Have you ever heard that term?
Yeah.
Yeah.
BIT is always focused on forming new partnerships and opportunities to assist the community and our members with their continued professional growth and development. Do you have a product or service that you would like to share with the BIT audience? Or maybe you'd like to support the BIT community and do your part in helping us with stopping the divide. Start by sponsoring one of our podcasts. Please email us at contactus@blacksintechnology.net.
So where did that come from? I know I heard you mention, you were, what did you say? The young Malcolm X or the kid Malcolm X?
They called me Mini Malcolm in school. One of my
and
I still love. Yes.
Right. Where did that come from? Was there someone in your family? Was there a teacher that you kind of looked up to that kind of instilled that in you? Because I'll tell you, there's a lot of, at least people that I grew up with, and myself even, I didn't have that at that age. I probably didn't come into that until later on as an adult. So, where do you think you picked that up from?
I really think I picked it up from, I think first and foremost, I think I was just born a little different, and that's okay. Love yourself.
Right.
Because my parents tell me stories that I was always kind of like this kid. I was the kid that almost got kicked out of preschool because I told all the preschoolers Santa Claus wasn't real.
Whoa,
and they actually called my parents to come to the school because they were like, well, of course, this 3-year-old didn't make this up on their own. And my mom was like, we didn't tell her Santa Claus didn't exist. She has decided that he doesn't. Right.
Wow.
And as her mother, I'm just going to go with it. So I think it's this dual reality of kind of popping into this world and being like, I really want truth. And then also having parents that really fueled that. My parents never lied to me. So I remember distinctively when I went home for the first time and said, I'm Black. And I remember my dad saying like, so what does that mean to you? Right. And I had to be 4 or 5 years old. And I said, I don't know what it means. What does it mean? But I've been told that I'm Black and I don't know what that means. And my parents didn't beat around the bush. Right. I remember in 2nd grade when we had to do some kind of like, I think it was 1st, 2nd grade. And they were like, we're going to talk about where people come from. We're talking about Ellis Island and that kind of thing. Great. And I went home and I said, so where do I come from? My parents were like, what? And just saying like, this is what I learned at school. People come from Ellis Island. Like, do I come from Ellis Island? Do we have, like the teacher says there are books in Ellis Island that have all these names in them. Like, can we go visit Ellis Island? And will we find, my great-great-grandmother in Ellis Island? And I remember my parents were like, oh, we got to have this conversation. Right.
Wow.
And I really appreciate that from them because they were just always so honest when I just came home and was like, so what's really going on? And that's how they taught me. They never tried to make me different than I was. They never said things like, oh, that's too much for you. Even when other family members were like, y'all, you can't talk to her like that. And my parents were like, why not? I'd rather it come from us than it come from the outside world. So she asked a question. We're going to sit here and answer it. And I really appreciate that about them. I could always go to my parents and ask the question. They would always give me the answer. And that was it.
Nice. That's pretty amazing. I mean, because, a lot of parents, they get caught up in the tradition of lying. The tooth fairy will leave $1 up underneath your pillow, or, you get a basket on Easter from the Easter bunny and things like that. And I can see, how that spirals out of control. Next thing you know, you're not telling your kids the truth about a lot of stuff.
Right.
And then they run around curious and then they get kind of suppressed, just, going through the motions and, with what they're learning in school. So they don't ask questions. And then on top of that, there are parents out there that they suppress the kids themselves. Quit asking me questions.
Yes.
That type of thing.
Never like that.
Yeah, that's dope. Because,
right. And it's funny because I think that when you're a child, you think everyone is raised this way because this is just your reality. So of course everyone has the same reality. And it wasn't until I went to college and until I became an adult where I would tell people these stories and I would get these this body language reaction where it was clear that my parents were very different. But I think it comes from their parents, right? I think my mom, when I hear stories about my mom when she was younger from her siblings, I think there's a lot of me that comes from my mother, right?
Right.
Whether or not she'll admit it out loud today, I think there's a lot of me because there's a lot of similar examples in school. And when I think about my dad and, how his mother was so vocal and she was born and raised in Mississippi and she was so vocal about racism and feminism. And what does it mean to be a bold, dark-skinned Black woman in America and not really care that makes you uncomfortable, to the point that her parents put her on a train and said, you need to go move up north because we're afraid the Klan's going to kill you.
Whoa.
Right. Yeah. And I always tell people like, that's the stock that I come from. I come from this family specifically of Black women who were just always like that. Like, just don't care and are very unapologetic about not caring that their existence makes you uncomfortable. And then here I come into the tech world where it was clear that my existence made people uncomfortable. And I don't think I had the common sense at 22 to care that it made people uncomfortable. And so I was just like, well, if I don't care, then I'm just going to not care boldly. And that's how we get here.
I think that's amazing. My son is a very outspoken person, sometimes to his detriment, but outspoken nonetheless. And we are, my wife and I as parents are always, let's just say we're always put on our toes.
Oh yeah.
about how to handle that. Yeah. And for me, I have a lot more patience, and I'm willing to let a lot more slide because I know how it was for me growing up, and not being able to express those same things, not being able to say, what's on my mind. And I think, and some people might not even notice this, but that has an effect on you as you get older. You stop questioning things. You stop being bold about stuff. You stop being outwardly expressive, and you kind of, go along with everything. And my son isn't like that. And I'm happy that he isn't. And I tell my wife all the time, I understand some of the stuff he says may be, it may trigger you, but let's just be happy that he can be expressive.
How old? Can I ask how old he is?
He's 12. He's
so
12.
Happen, and I always tell people this, is that the kids who are outspoken, they're not going to become less outspoken. They're just going to become more strategic.
Yeah.
And I had to learn that in my 20s. It's not that I've become less outspoken. I have learned this beautiful creative art of, number one, deciding what weapon I'm going to bring to a fight. People always say, like, you don't have to fight every battle. And I'm very against that. If you ask any of my mentees, I'm like, no, you should fight every battle. Every single one of them. What weapon you bring to fight with, though, that's the kicker. And so I'm still learning this art of, what weapon am I going to bring into this environment today to make my point? And sometimes that weapon is silence, right? Because I'm like, is it worth this fight? And so the beauty of your son and souls like us, is that as they get older, they will learn this art, not of discernment, but literally just like, you know what? I'm not going to bring the bomb today. Because me bringing the bomb actually and selfishly does not help me. So maybe just walking away helps me. Yeah.
Right.
So it's just, growing up. Yeah.
No doubt, because that's what we're trying to teach him right now, that tact and strategy.
And he'll learn it, whether it comes from you or whether it comes from life. And I'm not going to lie that I've definitely missed out on opportunities at work in my first 5 years because they were like, Lexi said what? Right. And I've had to learn that art, and I'm grateful that I've learned that art. That does not mean that I'm going to be silent over some unequity stuff. I'm not going to do that. How in which I decide to handle it, though, will be different.
The BIT Foundation has established featured partnerships and programs with companies such as Amazon, AT&T, CompTIA, Techstars, and more to provide our members with the resources we want and need to thrive and succeed in this tech ecosystem. To learn more, visit foundation.blacksintechnology.net. Join now, and remember, membership is free.
And so I want to give people a little bit of background on how I came to notice you. Yeah. We were all on a panel. What was that? 2 weeks ago?
Yeah, 2 weeks ago. Yeah.
That was put together by Dr. Fallon Wilson. And when I first heard you speak, I was like, I'm not going after her. Like, I am going to shut up because I don't know what the hell I'm talking about compared to. But no, what you were saying was so eloquent. It was so profound. I kind of cowered in my seat. Like, let me rethink my answers that I planned on, because I jotted down notes and all this stuff, and I was just like, this might be out the window. But that's how I got to know who you are, and I was just like, I got to get her on a podcast because your voice is incredible, and what you were saying was incredible. And I know in your bio, that there was mention of your thought-provoking advice and opinions on how to create a more equitable work environment, and it stemmed from your own experiences and some of the most popular tech companies. And so my question to you is, what do you consider an equitable work environment, and how do you know when it's been achieved?
I think an equitable work environment, so here's the issue with equity, is number one, people like to define equality with equity, and those are different.
Yeah.
Because I always tell people, in my opinion, equality means that we're abiding by the rules in the book. In my experience with adulting, nobody follows the rules in the book. So I don't want equality. I want equity. I want you to treat me the same way you treat that person sitting next to you. Right.
Right.
And how I define it really is people doing their own work in themselves to recognize, why are you treating that person different? And can I have that? How I define equity is having managers who want to actually get to know me. Because the complex thing about equity is that what I want in this moment, in the job that I'm in my career, could actually be different than what the person sitting next to me wants, because we all have the right to choose our own adventure.
Right.
I want managers to take stock of the fact that if you are making more money than me because you are my manager, and that is an adventure that you chose, right? That the equity piece of it is that you are treating my dreams the same amount of compassion and strategy as the person next to me. And those dreams could be different. But when you talk to me about what I want out of the next 6 months, when you talk about opportunities for promotion, and these are the kinds of things you need to do to get promoted, I want the equity where you're saying, okay, Lexi, so I hear you want to get promoted. These are the kinds of things that I need to see from you. Great. And by the way, because I'm a good manager, if you will give me the thumbs up, I'm going to put you in situations to have that opportunity. And that's personally what I've experienced. I really do not like the performative banter of things like, oh, well, everybody has the same experience. No, because we all know that you just took Joe in the back and gave him a 45-minute spiel about how even though this specific project you want him to work on is going to be horrible, it's not going to be fun. You know that the current head of our department thinks that work is the most transformative work this quarter. So the fact that you're giving Joe the golden ticket and saying, Joe, I know it's going to suck, but this is why it's important. And if you do well, then that gives me ground of promotion. That's where the inequity comes from, because nobody else knew that project was that important. Right. I always tell people in my career, no one has outwardly called me a derogative term in my face. I'm sure they've done it behind my back, and that's okay. Because they talked about Jesus, so what they gonna do to me, right? But I've been in situations where it is very clear somebody was picked out from my team to win the competition, to get the gold, and I wasn't picked. Why we weren't picked, I can give you a list of reasons. Right. But I wasn't picked. I've been in situations where I was picked and nobody else was picked. And that's the inequity piece. And so that's why I'm very interested in that, because I think we don't discuss enough about the one-on-one interaction of people. People want to talk about these huge strategies, which, by the way, I fully support. But at the end of the day, nobody leaves a company because the Pride Parade float was horrible. No one leaves a company because the Hispanic Heritage Month t-shirts were whack. No one leaves a company because the semi-problematic soul food dinner in the lunchroom in the middle of February was subpar. People leave companies and organizations because how they're treated on these one-on-one interactions, how they continue to work hard because their manager says, well, you need to work on this. And they work really, really hard. And then when it's time for the promotion or it's time for the end of the rainbow, because we all have to remember we can choose our own adventures. And many times people do not work at a company or take a role because they want to get promoted. They're working there for other reasons. But when it's time to cash in your prize after you've given your all, you can't cash in. That's an issue for me. Yeah.
Or you get blindsided about your performance that you weren't, you were never told suffered or at any time as well.
Yeah. And that's an issue for me as well. And so that's what equity means to me. And that's why it's so important. It's really about, so what are we doing in these one-on-one things for my manager, my leadership, other people that I work with see me as a human? Because there's the disconnect. You don't see me as a human. So if I'm going to sit here and do work, we need to figure out how you're going to see me as a human. And since I do consider myself a freedom fighter, which by definition just means I wake up every day and I make an active choice to help someone who needs help, and that could be small or large, I require other people to do the same thing. Yeah.
So how do you go about, I guess that's, would you say that's kind of one of the main obstacles these companies face, is not having that one-on-one interaction and being real about the circumstances, the situation, and environment that the employees are working in? Yeah,
I do. And I think one of the reasons is sometimes not even the people's fault who are doing it. I think sometimes I think it's also just company culture. We live in a society where since the beginning of companies and people going to work, and that work did not consist of farming or machinery building in a factory, there's this kind of like hush hush, right? It's like, so here's the monopoly board, but like some people get, the clue book of what's really going on, right? And I think the disconnect then becomes, then we add race, and then we add sexuality, and then we add gender, and then we add religion, and then we add immigrant status. We add all these things into the pot.
Right.
And then we look at it and we're like, wait, so why do all the people who usually have the same gender, same race, same sexuality, right, same type of haircut, why are they always getting the book, the under the table book? And I always tell people what I'm striving for is to get people to really think about that. Why did you get the book? Because you got the book, because you're in a place of leadership. What about you allowed you to get the book? Because you can't tell me it was your quality of work.
So,
right. So there's plenty of people that work hard.
Yeah.
So insane,
Exactly. So let me ask you this, because not everybody can be Lexi, right?
Yeah.
Not everybody is outspoken, a good word for that. They don't go for theirs like Lexi would go for hers, right? Mm-hmm. Not everyone is going to hold up a mirror to their boss or someone who got the promotion or whoever and say, look at yourself. How did you really get this? So how do you begin to break down these obstacles, these barriers?
I think the biggest barrier that you have to break down is putting the mirror to yourself. You can't expect other people to treat you in a certain way if you don't look in the mirror yourself. And to be very frank, the evolution of myself, the evolution of Lexi B, if you will, the first 4 to 5 years of my career, I was not like this. I was like this at happy hour, but I was not like this coming to work. What happened was I was at my first company and I didn't like what I was doing. I didn't like how I was being gaslit. There was a lot going on there, but I didn't have confidence. I did not think I was hireable. I started interviewing for my next company and I received hundreds of no's. And then I got a yes. And I just so happened to get a yes from, at the time, one of the hottest startups, right? Like I remember telling somebody at work when I got the job and they were like, oh my gosh, I applied there and I didn't get it. And in that moment, when the recruiter called me, I'll never forget, I was actually at work and I was in a conference room, like in a corner, right? And they called and said, you got the job, let's start negotiating. And I literally just knelt down to the floor and started crying.
Wow.
And the crying really came from this place of, I really thought that nobody would hire me. And when this recruiter called me and said, you're hired, I made a promise to myself that things were going to be different, because I'm like, wait, so now someone opened the door. It's a wrap, right? And I think that is very foundational in my personality. Look what happened with the new college grad program. When that head of engineering said, I'm going to give you $10,000, go do it. I was like, well, now you've opened the door.
Yeah.
You told me yes once, so now it's a wrap. I can do whatever I want, right?
Right.
Until you tell me to literally sit down, well, it's a wrap. And but it took time for me to look in the mirror within myself. I think it's interesting that people expect certain things from people when history shows us that's not how people work.
Right.
So I always tell people, don't come to me saying I hate my job, because I'm going to come to you and say, what do you want?
Yeah.
And not enough people do that. Not enough people take the stock onto their lives and can answer the question, why am I here right now? I think one of the issues with oppression, with racism, with white supremacy, is really this idea, and we don't talk about it enough, is that white supremacy has kidnapped dreaming from people of color bodies, especially Black bodies. It's kidnapped dreaming. And so we have all these people in the world who walk around saying, I want to be a VP. I want to be a CEO. I want to be the head of the hospital. I want to do this, right?
Yeah.
And then my question's always like, but why do you want that? And nobody can answer the question. I think it's something radical and militant and revolutionary for people, especially Black people, my people, to come to a table and say, I want this and this is why. Because for me, I'm like, what if you want to quit your day job and go backpacking around the world for 3 years? Mm-hmm. Then how you interact at work is going to be gravely different than the body next to you who actually wants to be the chief marketing officer. So why aren't we teaching our kids? Why aren't we promoting to our children? I'm speaking very general terms of, what do you want? Because what you want defines how you interact. It defines what weapon you bring to the battle. It literally is the foundation of every decision you make as an adult. And there have been times in my career where I've just wanted the money. And how I interacted at work was very telling of that. There were times in my career where I wanted time to just breathe. There were times in my career where I wanted to move up the chain. And it's interesting because everyone that I talk to who are older than me and wiser than me, they say the same thing. What do you want right now? In the next 2 years, what do you want? Because how you interact at work, how you deal with crazy people at work, how you deal with hard conversations, what you fight for, what you don't, 100% depends on what are you trying to solve in your life right now. And I wish everyone, that's how they define their career development, which then also means that's how you define equity. Because how I define equity right now in my life is possibly different than how you define equity, Greg. And that's totally cool, right? We may want different things right now in our lives.
So everything you said was spot on. And I experienced, I guess, that moment later in my career as well. It wasn't until, I was well into my job as a tech professional before I had the confidence to understand my worth and understand what I wanted, but to be open and be vulnerable to someone coming in and asking those questions of me. Because to be honest, it's someone taking a mirror, pointing it at you and asking you these hard questions. And sometimes you feel totally, I guess, incompetent in a way because you don't have the answers. You felt it and said, oh yeah, I think I should. But when someone actually asks you the questions, you draw a blank and you're just like, well, actually, maybe I don't know. And it took someone, especially in my career, who, still mentors me to this day. I say it's mentoring, to get me to where I'm at in my career right now. Just, asking me those types of questions, having me make a plan, asking me what I want, those types of things. And for a lot of, I think, Black people in tech, those questions, and maybe a lot of people, period. But, I know Black people, for certain, they don't get asked these things. We end up not having an idea of our self-worth. And that makes things like job searching scary, right? That makes us end up staying at jobs longer than we should, putting up with bullshit, right? Instead of understanding what we're worth and going out and say, hey, I'm valuable to you. I provide a service to you. You're not just paying me. I provide a valuable service to you and the company. And my services, my worth, my value, I can take somewhere else with no problem. It takes a while to get to that point for some people.
Highest bidder. I always tell people the highest bidder gets my services. And I think it's important. I also think how I got there, I I was very blessed and cursed at the same time early on in my career to experience some things that I don't think most 23-year-olds experience, right? And but the beautiful thing about those experiences that I learned a lot, because I'd be in rooms with all these executives and I would watch them at their peak, right? When the PR people are not in the room, when the comms people aren't in the room, just watching them at the full. And what I learned very quickly is that many rooms that I was in, I would literally watch leadership come in big and bold, you know, with their expensive jewelry and all this type of stuff. And they would start the meeting and they would say, "Hey, Greg, so tell the people what we're doing." And I remember at a very young age, I would start laughing because I'd be like, "Wait, so you don't know what we're doing? Cool. But you're getting paid a lot more money than Greg. So how can I be you?" Right? And that was the first lesson that I learned. Was I was like, wait a minute, a lot of people in leadership actually don't know the weeds of what's going on.
Right.
So that means that in many cases, the people who do know the weeds of what's going on are actually currently smarter than the person making 3 times as much as in the room right now. And when you see that in real time and you piece it together in real time, you have this like aha moment where you're like, wait a minute, y'all are not smart. And that's not a negative thing. In this moment, you're not the smartest person in this room.
Right.
But somehow you've done something where you're making more money than the smartest person in this room.
Right.
And at 23, I was like, wait, I don't want a roommate anymore. I want to go buy shoes. I want to go on fabulous trips to Greece. So I'm not going to allow you to make me feel like I'm not smart.
Right.
Because without me, you couldn't have this meeting right now in this room.
Right.
So actually, I win. I'm going to take my cake because I win, right? And I want everyone to really acknowledge that.
Yeah.
That imposter syndrome is interesting, but if you just take a step back, breathe, people breathe, and just start watching the room, you'll realize that you're actually not an imposter. They are. Because you're needed for the conversation. They're asking you for the data. They're asking you for the info. If you were on vacation, they'd move the meeting.
Yeah.
So actually, y'all are the imposter. Let me just do my job and be blessed. Right?
Yes.
And when people really understand that, and it's always this moment in your career, like you said, where you really get it, it's a wrap from there. Because then you stop allowing people to make you feel like you don't know what you're talking about. If anything, you come to work and you're like, okay, so we all know I know what I'm talking about. I'm not going to sound like a jerk when I say it out loud, but we all know. So again, here's your service. What do I get in return? By the way, this is what I want in return. Yeah. So how are you going to do that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Nice. So tell us about Sista Circle, Black Women in Tech. When did you start the organization, and tell us about the motivation behind starting it?
It started in 2017. I was working at this tech company, and I'll never forget what happened is that I was in a room and we were working on something very complex. And it was one of those things that, you know, leadership's in the room and you have to be very stern. And I was the program manager and my boss was there, other people that were there. And it was very clear that I was very nervous telling leadership that they needed to get it together, right? Imagine being 27 and you're in a room and it's like, you know, the head of policy, and you have to be the main person in the room saying, yo, you didn't do your job, right? I didn't want to do that. I was the youngest person in the room. I was the only Black person in the room. It was terrifying. And this guy who's phenomenal, who happens to be a white man, one day he pulled me aside out of the room and he said, okay, I'm going to tell you something that may not come out right, but I promise you it is in your best interest. And of course I rolled my eye because I was like, here we go, right? And it is the one time in my life someone has told me something with that caveat and it actually was like, okay, this is good. And he said, you need to be more of a jerk. And I was like, excuse me. And what I loved about him is he was so honest about it. And he said, so you need to be more of a jerk. You cannot walk into these rooms trying to solve compliance problems and tiptoeing around the issue. You cannot tiptoe around someone who hasn't done their job when you're dealing with the stuff that you're dealing with. And I looked at him and I said, but how do I talk sternly to the head of marketing And he's like, you need to figure that out. That's what he said. He said, your job is dependent on it. Lexi, figure this out. And what he meant at the time, because I've talked to him about it later, was he meant that he is a white straight man. So he knows he can walk to a room and just cut up and nothing will affect his job.
Right.
But he knows that I can't do that. And so I took that feedback. I went home. I thought about it for a few days and I was like, yo, this man is right. In order for me to do a good job at my job, I'm going to have to be more forceful. And this whole thing about like, well, I can't say things a certain way because I'm a woman. And then I can't say with this tone because I'm Black. And I don't want to be the angry Black woman. Well, I'm damned if I do and I'm damned if I don't. Right. So I literally started asking Black women at the company I was working with. I was like, how do I sound more forceful without being the angry Black woman? And they were all like, whoa, that's deep. I don't even know. Right. And some of them were giving me feedback and ideas, but none of it really worked because they weren't in the position that I was in. So one day I went on Facebook and I started a group and I called it Sista Circle Black Women in Tech. And I invited some Black women who I was Facebook friends with that were in tech. And I said, invite your friends. I have a question. I'm going to schedule a brunch. I need them to come and I need someone to tell me how to do this. And that's how the group started. It really started from this place of like, I need help. Right. And then it's now become this amazing solidarity group of over 8,200 women Black women around the world who are in tech adjacent places like nonprofits that support tech, students and women transitioning to tech. And it's become this solidarity brave space for people to talk about what's really going on, to like go in the group and say, yo, my manager just said this. How are we responding? Right. And to really kind of get that Underground Railroad inside scoop, to get the cliff notes, because I always tell people, you know, I'm only me and I only live my life and therefore I only observe a few other people's lives. But if I get into a room with 15, 20 people and they can tell me how they do it in their life, my gosh. Right. And remember that same idea kind of came from that new college grad program where I was like, I want to eat and ask these people all these questions because I don't know what's going on. Right. And I just did the same thing for Black women because I just didn't see enough of us. And it was hurtful. And it's just very uncomfortable walking into spaces and always being the only one and having to very much jive it up to make people feel comfortable. And I was in my late 20s and I was like, this ain't it. Right. This could not be my life. I am not going to do this till I'm 50. So either A, I have to figure out a way to retire at 40 and make some money and be good, or B, I have to do things differently. But I can't just continue to make white people feel comfortable when they're acting a fool. So people tell me what I need to do to get my job done, but how can I navigate this differently? Because the definition of chaos is to do the same thing and expect the same results. And I think in my late 20s, I was like, it's not working. Right. And I'm not going to continue to do it. So someone just show me how to do it differently. And even if I just try 85 things out and none of them work until the 86th, I'd rather spend my career doing that than just pretending that I'm okay, because I'm not.
What's up, everyone? We hope that you're enjoying this episode of the Blacks in Technology Big Tech Talk podcast. Do you or someone you know have a dope story that they want to share with our BIT audience? Blacks in Technology is seeking guests to be on our podcast. We're looking to highlight the journeys and experiences of Black women and men in the tech industry. So if you know of someone, send them our way. Shoot us an email to contact us at blacksintechnology.net or click on the link in the show notes and fill out our form. We're looking to hear from you.
So what's the mission? What's the goal of Sista Circle?
We actually have 3 goals. So first and foremost, the goal is to connect all of these women all around the world and give them permission to be their most authentic self, which is something that is so simple, but yet so profound and so controversial when you're talking about Black women. Right. We many times do not have the permission to be our full selves, and it can be very draining. So that's the first part of our mission statement. The second part of our mission statement is to partner with tech companies from all around the world and have these very intense, complex, hard conversations, right? Call companies out to the carpet and say, okay, so this is what is happening. How are you going to fix it? Hey, leaders, this is what you're doing wrong. Don't say that ever again, right? What does it look like when you have a group of Black women walking into a space and requiring you to be better? What does it look like when a person who is not Black says, I am going to receive this invitation to come into this space and be called out? Cool. Right. And then the last thing is that our big thing is we partner with Black owned businesses. We're very big on making sure that our wider Black community is also uplifted. So whether that means that when we have in-person events, which we haven't because of COVID, but when we had in-person events, requiring that all of the vendors have to be Black. And if they're not Black, they have to be people of color. We have an annual gift guide where we partner with hundreds of Black owned businesses to showcase what they do and their work and have coupon codes, because we want these women in this group to understand that, yes, we have found each other, but we also have a responsibility to continue the freedom fight and continue the movement and the revolution for all Black people of the diaspora. So that's our mission.
Excellent. I love what you said about, just having that safe space and being, having the permission to be ourselves. I have a situation some years ago at a tech conference. It was actually at a tech conference out in San Francisco. And they provided us Blacks in Technology space to have a meetup within inside of their conference. So it's a bunch of us. We get together, we meet up and everything like that. We're talking about, our backgrounds and what company we work for. And one of the people, this one gentleman, he was talking about his colleagues and how they were out. I said, we started talking. He said something about they were what we were doing later or something like that. And we were all trying to find something to get into. And he was like, yeah, my colleagues are going out to party or blah, blah, blah. I was like, oh yeah. Where you guys going? You going? Nah, I don't party around my colleagues. And I was like, what do you mean?
I heard that.
And he was just like, I just don't, I'm not that, and I'm not about to be the Black guy to be around partying. And I was just like, wow. Like, and not to knock him fully. It's just at that point, I was just like, why don't you want to be who you are around everybody, right? And for me, I was like, I'm at that point in my career now where I don't give a shit,
Me neither. That's why I just don't.
And I'll go out and I'm not about to be the caricature. I'm not saying that, but that's not going to stop me from having a good time if I want to.
And I think it's important that you said that, because the fun fact, my dad always tells me that in his generation, it was always like, oh, the business happens, the stuff happens on the golf court, right? And in my generation, like the generation that we're in now, I always tell people, especially in tech, the business happens at the happy hour.
Right.
So I always go to the dinner and the happy hour. I may not be there the full time because, fun fact, I'm actually an introvert. So just my personality, I have to go home and refuel after a certain number of hours a day. But it's very important for us to be at the happy hour. It's very important for you to be comfortable enough to be there. Right. It's also very important for you to know code switching. I think the term code switching has received so much bad press because of racism. Because I'm like, the actual definition of code switching is that you understand that how you talk to your mom is different than how you talk to your teacher, which is different than how you talk to your boss, and could be different than how you talk to your spouse. Right. I applaud that definition. I applaud that, especially as a proud Black American woman coming from proud Black American roots where, my grandmother would be like, I'm not your little friend. Right. So I applaud it. You are not my friend. You are my elder. And so how I talk to you is just different. And I would expect that from my descendants as well. And so I think that we have to kind of learn this art of, you need to go to the happy hour. That's where you get the good juice, right? That's where you learn what's really going on. Yeah. But there's also this beautiful thing about being able to walk into a room and you do kind of take that code switching hoodie off and you can just breathe.
Yeah.
Among people that get it without you having to explain it. You walk in, like, Greg, we got you.
Right.
It's beautiful.
Yeah, I'm actually going to my first golf outing next week.
There you go. Let me see.
And I don't play golf a lick. I still go to the gym and play basketball and try to not hurt myself against these young brothers. But
whatever floats the spirit, the golf thing, the happy hour, the basketball court. There's always that place of, I call it business worship.
Right.
And that's where decisions are made. And you should go because that does help your career.
Yeah.
And so the story that you just said really resonates because I hear that a lot. And I think the purpose of Sista Circle, one of the purposes, is for these women to know that wherever they are, they can just breathe in this space. I can promise you that. I can't promise you everything, but I want you to be able to breathe.
All right. Yeah. I like that. I love that.
Calling all women game developers for the second AT&T Unlock Games Showcase. Submit your beta version game now through December 3rd and take your shot at a $100,000 grand prize. Enter at gaming.att.com/unlockgames.
So I love this excerpt in your bio. You state inspire people to create their desired life journey by understanding their purpose and life goals. You say people deserve to live the life that caters to their strengths and passions. So 2 questions from that. How do you get people to recognize their purpose and life goals? And how do you get people to recognize their strengths and passion?
I think that strength, passion, and purpose should be boiled up into the same thing.
Okay.
I think that if you do the work, then you will take your strength and your passion, put them together, and that becomes your purpose. And how you do it is you give people the room to mess up, but you also require people to, in that mess up, figure it out. You require them to do the hard work. In the early stages of my career, I didn't know what I was doing. I was a program manager. People would ask, like, what that is? I don't know. I get paid every week, right? And I had a mentor who, I think within 5 months of my job, she came into my office and she closed the door and she was like, fix it. And I was like, excuse me? And she said, I don't care if you don't know why you're here. I'm giving you 6 months to figure it out. And every week she would come to my desk and say, have you figured it out? And I'd be like, no, but I have a lot of questions. And she'd be like, ask them, because she was a senior program manager. And I would ask her questions. She would always poke and prod me and say, so do you like doing that? Do you like in this program management role, in this specific task, do you like doing it? And I would say, no. Why? And then I'd say, I don't know. I just don't like it. And she would literally be like, piss poor answer. Try again tomorrow. Right. And so she really required me with a lot of tough love. And I'm so grateful for her to be able to articulate the things that I like in my job, the things that I'm good at in my job, regardless if I like them or not, and the things that I can't stand in my job. And every couple of months, she'd make me write a list of all these things. And then she'd highlight all the things that were the same in the like category, in the what I'm good at category, and what my job offers. Wow. And then she'd be like, so the highlights, that's what you're moving toward. What I also realized by continually doing that exercise for about 3 years straight was the stuff that I'm actually good at, I've always been good at. Even as a child. Right. As a child, they didn't call it program management. As a child, I was the kid that was helping separate the presents at the birthday party. Right? Right. As a child, they didn't call it organization and timeline. As a kid, I was the person going to my mom and saying, look, I have ballet at 6:30. It's currently 5:30. So we need to get to going. Right. Because the ballet studio is 42.4 miles. I looked it up on MapQuest and printed it out for you. Right. But of course, nobody was going to tell a 7-year-old that's program management. Right. Right. And so I always tell people it's interesting that when you actually start doing this work, and again, because you own your career, no one's going to do this work for you but you. And I was blessed that I had someone reminding me to do the work, but she couldn't do the work for me, right? Is that most times you'll figure out the stuff that you're really good at, the stuff that you gravitate toward, is the stuff that you've been doing since you came out of the womb, but nobody labeled it that way.
Wow.
And what happens when you can figure out that those kinks and quirks and things that you did on the playground can actually make you money?
Very, very interesting. So tough love, tough questions.
Yeah.
Getting you
and honesty.
Yeah, and honesty. Yeah. Excellent. So what's next for you?
Honestly, next, I think the future is endless. I know right now I'm currently working at a tech company, and I love what I do. I work for Twitter, and I love the people that I work with and what I do and solving really hard problems in the privacy space. So really enjoy doing that. So that's definitely next as we continue to do that. Mm-hmm. And then also I've really started putting a lot of effort into speaking engagements. I really enjoy speaking, and I enjoy connecting with people and having these conversations like I'm having with you, which is why I'm so grateful to be here this evening, and really building that out. Like where can I go speak and have these conversations, and not just about diversity, equity, and inclusion. I always tell people, I've never worked in a D&I department, so I can't tell you these large scale strategies, but I can look at you and say, be a better manager.
Right.
And I can have conversations about what does privilege look like. And so I created like a privilege workshop a few years ago that I've been doing virtually since COVID, really talking about, y'all want to talk about DE&I, but have you checked yourself? Because we could hire someone to create like the sexiest DEI strategy, but have you checked yourself? Because again, people don't leave because the DEI strategy is whack. They leave because you treat them like crap. Right.
Yep.
And that's what I want to do, is really mobilize these conversations around requiring people to be better people at work, requiring people to understand death by 1,000 paper cuts, requiring people to have hard conversations within themselves so they can come to work and expect greatness from their peers. But they can only expect that when they are doing the work at home to say, this is what I want. So I'm going to come to work with this intentionality of knowing what I want, and therefore treating people like that, and expecting them to treat me like that. And that starts at home. That starts with you. It does not start with anybody else. So that's what I'm doing next. Yeah.
So not a lot. No, I'm just kidding.
Not a lot. Just hanging out, playing with the dog.
Right. So what's next for Sista Circle? What plans?
Growing, always growing. I think the big question mark in the air is, when are we going to meet in person again because of COVID? So really trying to figure that out.
Okay.
Because everybody wants to meet in person, and I want to meet in person, but I want people to be healthy and happy and safe.
Right.
And just continuing really to grow the effort. We're really thinking about where else could Sista Circle be on the internet? Maybe not just Facebook, maybe someplace else, maybe having our own space that we own and we operate, but really continuing mobilizing this effort of making sure these Black women are getting jobs, making sure they understand that you have to create your own adventure and not every job's going to be perfect. And then also giving them the resources to be able to defend themselves, right? What is your armor when you walk into work that allows you to be your best self? And then how can we support you in that? So, yeah.
Okay. And then how can people learn more, find out more, if they wanted to reach out to you, how can they do that?
Yeah. The best way, honestly, is Twitter or Instagram. I'm at Lexi B Speaks on both. And then, of course, LinkedIn, which is my government name, which is Alexandria Butler. Yeah.
Well, Lexi, I want to say thank you for joining me on the show tonight. I enjoyed the conversation very much. I wish you luck with Sista Circle and with everything you do in the future. And hopefully, we can speak again, maybe get you to speak at one of the BitCons.
Call me. I'm here. Okay. I'm just at home minding my business in COVID because, it's still out there. So tell people not to touch anybody because we're still kind of in the deep end of it. But thank you. This was wonderful. And Greg, what you're doing is fantastic and freedom fighting. And please let me know how I can support that.
I will.
Always.
I will. Thanks a lot, Lexi. Take care.
You too. Bye. Bye.
Blacks in technology. Blacks in technology. Blacks
in technology. Blacks in technology. Blacks in technology. Blacks in technology.